It's time to have a Dalton Kincaid discussion. What makes him so dynamic? Why is he so valuable? And where should we set our expectations? We're breaking that down for you today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. It's time to have a discussion that I've been very much looking forward to, and it's all about Bills' second-year tight end, Dalton Kincaid. And it's not just me today. I'm joined by Bruce Nolan, and Bruce is a big Dalton Kincaid stan. And one thing about Bruce is him and I are in a dynasty fantasy football league together. We've been doing it this is the 5th season. We have a lot of fun with this. But Mr. Bruce Nolan traded away Stefon Diggs in a package that got him Dalton Kincaid. And I'm guessing Bruce feels pretty good about that right now. Bruce, welcome in.
Well, I appreciate you leading with that because right away my credibility has gone up because I did that at the very beginning of last season when Dalton Kincaid was essentially coming out of rookie minicamp and Stefon Diggs had absolutely no buzz around him, suddenly tatering off for whatever reason. And all of a sudden, a year later, I look brilliant. One of the things that I think is funny about the Dalton Kincaid conversation is that it's amazing how fast things change in a year. You know, a year ago, right after Dalton Kincaid was drafted, it's, well, how are they going to make use? This offensive scheme has not historically dabbled meaningfully into 12 personnel. You're going to have to see something that you haven't seen before. Now, a year later, I posed the question on social media right before the draft and said, hey, you know, if the Green Bay Packers offered you pick 25 for Dalton Kincaid, would you say yes? And everybody was like, no, absolutely not. So he went from, I don't know if you can do something to make him worth a first round pick to, no, you'd have to give me like a top 10 pick for Dalton Kincaid in a year. It's absolutely absurd. And I'm happy to be here to talk about it.
Well, Bruce, I've paid close attention to your work for a number of years now, whether it's through podcasts and, of course, the interactions on social media. And I don't think I've ever seen you gravitate towards a player, have more hype about a player than I have Dalton Kincaid. Like you are in on Dalton Kincaid. And so we're going to attack this conversation really through 3 different lenses. We'll start with what makes him so exciting. Then we're going to talk about the value of Dalton Kincaid as a potential go-to guy as a tight end, and then just kind of the expectations moving forward in the last segment. But I want to give you the floor here to start this conversation. You are a big stand for Dalton Kincaid. What makes him so exciting for you?
I think the first thing that makes Dalton Kincaid exciting for me is that there are certain players that you watch, especially in the passing game, and you look at them catch the ball, you look at the way that they move, and you think to yourself, that guy's just a natural football player. There are some people you see coming out in college, and you see them attempt to run a route, and they don't look natural football players. They don't look natural when they catch the ball. They're always fighting the ball, or it's getting into their chest, or they look really athletic. But then all of a sudden, when they have to do football things, they don't look that athletic anymore. And we all know somebody like that. Everybody knows somebody who looks like Tarzan, and then you put him on like a pickleball court and you go, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He can't even hit the ball. He's uncoordinated. He's tripping over his feet. And there's a difference between someone who just looks the part, runs fast in a straight line, maybe even performs well at the combine in the athletic testing, but then all of a sudden you see him in the gauntlet drill, or you see them try to like do football things, and you think to yourself, this guy's he's just not a football player. He's just a really good athlete. And we conflate those two things frequently. And with Dalton Kincaid, it's the exact opposite. In fact, I love the fact, I think it's hilarious that we do not have an RAS score on Dalton Kincaid because, of course, he was dealing with a back injury and didn't test. So you're just like, well, he looks athletic on the field, and then you see him play, and you're like, no, we're fine. Like, we're fine. Like, you watch a couple of his games, you watch the game at USC, obviously everybody's seen the game against USC, and you think to yourself, yeah, I'm fine with this. Like, I don't need to see him run a 40-yard dash in shorts and go, okay, whew, man, thank goodness he's a 4.68 and not, like a 4.79. I'd be really, really upset. And Dalton Kincaid is simply one of the more natural football players that the Buffalo Bills have drafted in recent years. One of the things that was a concern about Kaiir Elam when he came out is that tested really well, but then sometimes you watched him and you're like, oh, he doesn't look super fluid when he plays. And you think, well, he's going to have to learn how to play in zone and all this stuff, this feel for the game, the movement ability for the game, all of these things that you can't really quantify. All of them Dalton Kincaid has. If you look back at last year and you close up the shop on the year, everybody who watches film loves Dalton Kincaid. There are people who are fantasy analysts who are just analytics only guys. They don't actually watch any football. We all know people like this. Like, I don't get it. Like, it's fine. But every single person, NFL level, Bills level, AFC East level, whatever the tier is, if you're a film guy, you came away going, oh boy, Dalton Kincaid is he's good at the footballs. And so, me loving to watch the film the way I do, I love watching the Dalton Kincaid play the footballs.
Well, and I think expanding on that in terms of what makes him so exciting for me is you kind of mentioned how natural he is as a football player, and the receiving skill is very, very natural. But what's even more impressive about that is how young he is, not necessarily just 24 years old, but relatively new to football, which suggests there's a lot of room for upward mobility. I mean, his primary focus growing up was basketball. His mom didn't want him to play tackle football, and he only started playing football as a senior in high school. He was a no-star recruit. He wasn't getting any college looks. He considered not playing any college sports and was actually going to enroll at Colorado State and study abroad. Well, fast forward a few years, he's a first-round pick in the NFL, and he looks like he's going to be a future star. Of course, we know he goes on to go to San Diego as a non-scholarship athlete, get to Utah, and now he's potentially the go-to option in this Buffalo Bills passing game. But when you talk about a natural football player who's not necessarily very experienced playing football, that's where I get really excited about what the Bills can continue to unlock with a very, very good-looking young player. You mentioned the tape, and catching footballs, running routes, all of that's really cool. But part of what makes him such a fun player to watch on tape is the things that he does that's not necessarily that.
Yeah.
It's the effort, right? Like, always chasing the ball and looking to make blocks down the field and helping the ball carrier up. I mean, literally sprinting and giving maximum effort all the time. One of my favorite plays was Josh Allen was running in a touchdown, and Dalton Kincaid acted like he was being targeted so that he would draw some defenders to him at the catch point to alleviate the possibility of Josh Allen getting hit. I mean, just doing little things like that makes him very easy to fall in love with, on top of him being a very natural football player.
It's, if you were watching like your son play football and he was giving the kind of effort that Dalton Kincaid gives, you'd be so proud of him. You'd take him out for ice cream. When I was a kid and I was playing football, RC Cola was the thing. I was all excited to get an RC Cola after the game. So Dalton Kincaid for me gets an RC Cola.
So it's easy to understand why he's so exciting, right? The skill set and all the things we just talked about. As you forecast him moving forward, Bruce, what are some of the areas that you feel like there's room for him to grow and develop, and there's, that upward mobility? What areas of his game are you looking for him to take a step in?
I think that when I heard Dalton Kincaid say that he was trying to get a little bit stronger so he could try and win against press, that my ears perked up a little bit about that. One of the things that we're going to talk about later is the benefits of having a tight end as a primary weapon, and something that is important for a lot of offenses. And one of the things we want to talk about is that having a great tight end, this idea, this theory where you have an abstract and you go, oh, well, he's big enough to beat defensive backs, and then he's fast enough to beat linebackers, right? That's what everyone says when they talk about mismatch. They talk about situations where whatever type of player archetype you put on that mismatch, you're going to have a win, right? You're throwing rock, but also you're throwing scissors at the same time. Mm-hmm. So the defense is like, whatever I throw, I'm in trouble. And that's why you need mismatched linebackers, right? You need matchup players on the second level that can deal with players like Dalton Kincaid. That is best accentuated by your ability as an offense to move the player around. Because then you get to pick, you get to say, we're going to dictate these matchups. Having a piece that you believe is a matchup piece is best accentuated by the fact that you can actually, match them up. That's how that works. But if you can't trust a player to be put out wide because you're afraid that if he gets jammed by a meaningful corner with some size, all of a sudden he's locked up and taken out of the play, well, then you don't really have a matchup piece, do you? You have a partial matchup piece. Well, he's a matchup piece if we do only these things with him, right? As long as we keep him, inside the box, now he's a matchup piece. Well, you know what we call that? Not a matchup piece. That's what we call that. So when you have a player like this and he comes out and says, hey, want to get stronger, get better with my hand usage to beat press, you go, oh, okay. You want to be one of those people, right? One of those people where you can put him in line and say, you know what? We don't like your linebacker core. We don't think you as a defense can hang. We're going to stick Dalton Kincaid, tighten the slot or on the line and say, cover him down the seam. Do it. I dare you. Or you have a defense that has pretty decent matchup linebackers. You know what? We don't think your corners can handle him. We're going to put him out wide 30% of the snaps this game. And we're just going to see how you do there with that size. We're going to throw him a couple back shoulders and your defensive back's just going to throw his hand up in the air and go, well, what am I supposed to do? Like, he's too big. I don't know what you want me to do. That right there is what I want to see for Dalton Kincaid because he clearly sees it in himself. He said, hey, I want to get better at these things. And if that is a directive, if that was like his exit interview and they said, hey, we want to put you out wide more next year, but we need you to be able to beat press. So get with your coaches, get in the weight room, do what you got to do. Then I'm excited because that's the thing that can make it not just a good player, an actual matchup player, not just in theory, but in reality.
Yeah, Bruce, we see that very similarly. I thought being able to kind of play through contact, whether that is in press coverage or even just when he's releasing into the second level and that's those linebackers going to look to kind of pick him off a little bit. Thought there was times where he got hung up on that, and getting through that more clean is going to make him more valuable more consistently, and that, of course, means more production. But love the way that you frame that in terms of, all right, do this, and that also makes you more of that matchup player as situationally an X-receiver. And so it sounds like the thing that we've both identified as the thing we want to see him grow in is what he's actually doing. And so that makes it even more exciting to think about Dalton Kincaid into the future. All right, folks, coming up here in just a moment, Bruce and I are going to talk about the value of Dalton Kincaid, and we're going to get into that from a couple of different angles, including the economics and the scheme, so be sure to stick with us. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. My guest today is Bruce Nolan. You can find him on Twitter and Instagram at Bruce Exclusive. We're now going to kind of get into the economic and schematic value of a guy like Dalton Kincaid, who I think you can listen to Bruce and I through the first segment of this podcast and realize we're quite high on him and feel like he's going to be a big-time piece of this football team moving forward. And one of the interesting layers to that is the economic benefit. And I think if you're paying attention to the NFL, you see the direction of the wide receiver market, and it's blowing up. I mean, we've had 3 different players already this year reset the wide receiver market, and Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and A.J. Brown. So two Browns there. That's what threw me off a second there. Just Jefferson, $35 million a season. A.J. Brown, $32 million a season. Amon-Ra, $30.0025 million a season. You got Tyreek Hill at $30 million. Jalen Waddle's at $28.25 million per season. And you still got Jamar Chase to come. You've got CeeDee Lamb to come. You've got Brandon Ayuk to come. T. Higgins is coming. This market is booming. You know what market's not booming? Tight ends. The number one highest paid tight end in the NFL is Travis Kelce. Just signed the extension. $17.125 million a season. Not a math guy, but that's a whole lot less than Justin Jefferson at 35. TJ Hawkinson signed his contract in 2023. He's the second highest paid tight end, $16.5 million. George Kittle, $15 million. Dallas Goedert, $14.25. Mark Andrews, $14 million. And when you think about the guys who are going to drive that market up, I don't have a CeeDee Lamb and a Brandon Ayuk and a Jamar Chase waiting in the wings. We're talking about Pat Freiermuth and Kyle Pitts, Chig Okonkwo. Now, certainly Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid, if they kind of continue the trajectory that we're seeing, that's going to lead to some different conversations. But I mean, I hope I didn't take all the talking points there, Bruce, but there's a lot of economic value in a limited resource environment in having your primary pass catcher being a tight end and specifically not a wide receiver.
That's the point that I want to make. It's the limited resource environment. One of the reasons why the wide receiver market is continually accelerating is because you have at least one, if not two, in your case, four that you brought up, wide receivers who are setting the market every single offseason. Think about that in regards to tight end. We exist in a limited resource environment when it comes to impact tight ends in the league. You have Travis Kelce, you have Mark Andrews, you have players here at the top, and then you have just a bunch of guys who are fine. And so because of that, you don't have the rapid acceleration of the market because you don't constantly have a player coming up for review and then one-upping the next guy and one-upping the next guy. But when you have a passing league that was for a long time primarily 11 personnel, for like 15 years, it was an 11 personnel league. You had a lot of stats being given to a lot of receivers, and all of a sudden, every single offseason, you've got 3 receivers times 32 teams. You've got 96 guys who got meaningful snaps and got meaningful catches and meaningful yards, constantly one-upping each other in the contract market. And that's how you get that massive acceleration. How many tight ends are reaching the free agent market or getting close where you go, okay, this guy's going to set the new one. Okay, this guy's going to set the new one. Okay, this guy's going to set the new, just not as many. And so the quality is driven by the quantity. So the quality of contracts is being driven by the quantity of people who need to get them, because every time you're resetting the market over and over again. And the more times you reset it, the higher the number gets. It's like The Good Place in Janet. Every time you reset Janet in The Good Place, she gets a little bit better over and over and over and over and over again. Every time you reset the market, it gets a little bit higher. But you're just not resetting the market for tight ends very much. And so I'm going to get to the point with Dalton Kincaid, if he ends up being what we think he's going to end up being, where I am completely fine making him the highest paid tight end in football, because that's not that big of a deal. So the economics of having a tight end who's elite is 50% of what it is to have a wide receiver who's setting the market. It's insane.
I mean, we're talking 2 years from now. That's when Dalton Kincaid and Sam Laporta are going to be eligible for extensions. Is it 20? Is it even 20 million?
Yeah, it's like 18.5 million 2 years from now.
We're already at 35 with receivers.
We're going to have guards making 50% more than that.
We've already got $20 million a year guards. It's like safeties and corners and tight ends have just been the two markets that have lagged behind every other position. And I think the case for tight end makes sense. Corners, probably that's a whole nother podcast, but like it's pretty shocking to me. I think maybe there's some like year over year volatility on cornerback performance that I think has kind of trended ever since that 2017 class, where like it was Trey White, it was Marshawn Lattimore, Adoree Jackson, another good corner whose name escapes me right now, Marlon Humphrey. And all of those guys reset it. And now you kind of look back at those deals and you're like, I'm not sure any of that really worked out. And so we'll see what Pat Surtain and Sauce Gardner do. You feel like they're going to be the guys that can really challenge that. But that's a conversation for another day. We've made it clear that there's a lot of economic value in a limited resource environment to have your tight end be a big-time piece of your pie offensively. I took the lead on the economics side of this value conversation. When you think scheme, and that being a tight end. Where do you see a lot of value as it relates to Dalton Kincaid, 12 personnel, and even, some thoughts on Dawson Knox?
I want to take this in a different direction than perhaps many people would think I'm going to go with this. And I want to talk about Sean McVay here. Sean McVay's system is built very heavily on the idea that, first off, it's not a 12 personnel system. It's the exact opposite. It's 11 all the time, right? It's 11 massively, but it's the type of players that Sean McVay gets. It's the Cooper Kupps of the world, the Puka Nakuas of the world. And if you watch some of the things that they do when they don't catch the ball, you realize what Sean McVay's up to. And that is, he runs 11 personnel, but 2 of his 3 receivers can be used as inline blockers. Like infrequently, you'll have Puka Nacua as a lead blocker in the hole, right? You're running split zone with Puka Nacua coming across the formation. And the reason Sean McVay does this is because he goes, I'm going to force you to put your little people from a light box standpoint and your lighter personnel on the field. So you're 5'9" nickel corner. I'm going to make you keep him on the field. And then I'm going to use my 6'2", 206-pound receiver right up the gut and smash you. And I'm going to bring Kyron Williams behind him. So all of your smaller defenders, I'm going to force on the field. And then I'm going to run things as if I was running 12. Now, I want to take that and I want to convert that on the opposite side. Schematically, when you have freakish athletes who can be split out wide, as we mentioned earlier, if you can actually do that, all of a sudden you can just stay in 12 and now you have an opposite problem. Now you stay in 12 and you go, well, we can stay in 12 and run, run and shoot concepts if we want to. Right? I'll just stay in 12. I'll just sit here in 12 and you're just going to be in trouble. That's the way. And if you look at the teams that gravitated toward 12 last year, you have the Falcons, the Patriots, the Packers, the Chiefs, the Titans, Jaguars, Chargers, Bears, Bucks, Seattle. What do those passing games have in common? They all spread the wealth from a passing game standpoint. You didn't have like this dominant alpha receiver on pretty much any of those things. Now, the Falcons fans are pretty upset that they didn't have that Drake London and Kyle Pitts getting a billion targets. But as you look about what the year in transition is going to look for the Buffalo Bills, I don't think anybody thinks there's a 1,300-yard receiver on this roster right now. I don't think anybody, even the most passionate Bills fans, probably think it's more akin to a Packers Chiefs sort of scenario from last year. Well, those teams ran a lot of 12. Why? Because you can just stay in 12 and then you can just, whatever 2 receivers happen to fit well with that concept that you're running, you can put on the field. You don't build the offensive plays around your receivers' talents. You do it inverse. You say, well, we're going to be on 12 a significant chunk of the time, 35, 40% maybe. And then you can build whichever 2 receivers you want based on the concept. And so schematically, it's the inverse of what Sean McVay is doing in Los Angeles, previously in St. Louis. But that's what he's always done. Is I'm going to sit in this personnel grouping because you have to. You just have to deal with it. And the benefit schematically from having a player like Dalton Kincaid is that you can just sit in 12. And you can say, well, I can put him out wide. I can bring him in. I can put him in the slot. I can do whatever you want. And it was like at 19 percentage points for Dalton Kincaid wide. If all of a sudden that becomes like a 33, 33, 33 split where he's in line 33% of the time, he's in slot 33% of the time, he's wide 33% of the time, all of a sudden that becomes really annoying. And Dawson Knox has, you're probably not going to put him wide, but having 2 out of 3 options for Dawson Knox, putting him in the slot, having him in line formation, that matters. And so you have a freak athlete, struggled, obviously had the injury last year, missed some time. But if ever you were going to have a system that spread the ball around without a dominant alpha, there's a pattern here. Like we have a blueprint laid for us by the remainder of the NFL that I think applies schematically to what the Buffalo Bills might look like in 2024.
All about dictating terms and forcing matchups and making the defense wrong no matter what. Obviously, 12 personnel certainly helps that, and that makes Dawson Knox valuable. I know that he's in the doghouse for some Bills fans, right? I mean, 2 good seasons in a row and then kind of tried to play with a broken wrist and didn't look good and missed some time. But I think the Bills are better when Dawson Knox is available for them. And I think he's a foundational piece for what they want to be offensively. And I think what might be challenging is going to be reconciling his contract versus what his actual statistical production is going to be, because I'm not sure that it's ever going to make sense. But understanding that he is a critical piece foundationally of unlocking everything that you just talked about for Joe Brady and Josh Allen. All right, folks, we are going to talk about expectations. What type of numbers can Dalton Kincaid put up? We're going to do that for you here in just a moment, so be sure to stick with us. All right, Bruce. A lot of good conversation to this point, but what does it mean? What type of numbers can Dalton Kincaid put up? I want to kind of set the table here if I can. So as a rookie, Dalton Kincaid in 16 games had 73 catches on 91 targets, 673 yards, 2 touchdowns, 4.7% drop rate, 4.3 yards after catch per reception. Of course, 8 catches, 104 yards, and a touchdown in the playoffs. Those numbers were the fourth most, those 73 catches, fourth most ever in the history of the NFL for a rookie tight end. That was actually 7th most among all NFL tight ends last year. 10th most yards ever for a rookie tight end. 10th among all NFL tight ends in 2023. And then, of course, week 7 on, Dalton Kincaid led the team in receiving yards over the last 13 games of the year. And so now we're all excited. It's year 2. There's no Stephon Diggs. There's no Gabe Davis. There's plenty of targets. You'd think going to Dalton Kincaid. You see pictures of Josh Allen and Dalton Kincaid playing golf and spending time together in the offseason. And now I want to try to get my expectations in the right place, because part of what I do every offseason is I try to predict all the statistical output of the Bills' offensive players. And so this is somewhat of a self-serving conversation to kind of just pick your brain on this. When you consider top tight end production over the last 3 years, in 2023, we had 6 tight ends get 100 or more targets. We had 1 1,000-yard tight end, and that was George Kittle last year. And we had 3 other tight ends top 900 yards. That was Travis Kelce, Evan Ingram, and TJ Hawkinson. In 2022, we had 3 tight ends get 100 or more targets. That was Travis Kelce, TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, and Tyler Higbee, So there's 4 of them. You had 1 1,000-yard tight end, which was Travis Kelce, over 1,300 yards. You had 1 900-yard tight end. So over the last 2 years combined, we have 2 1,000-yard receiving tight ends. Go back to 2021. We had 6 tight ends get over 100 targets. We had 3 1,000-yard tight ends, and Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, and Kyle Pitts, and you had 1 more top 900. So while we're kind of getting excited about big statistical production for Dalton Kincaid, and I think he can do it, I think it comes with a bit of a dose of reality in terms of what's normal, in terms of what the top tight ends in the league are producing over the last 3 years. Like, how do you interpret all of this?
I think that we need to redefine the word big. Like you said, big for a wide receiver is different than big for a tight end. It's not he's our number 1 target, therefore the projections are what a number 1 receiver would look like. Even in offenses where you have an elite tight end who's getting a lot of targets and a lot of catches, the reason why that is that you don't have tight ends. We don't talk about this with tight ends very often, but you don't have tight ends who are averaging 15 yards a catch.
Yeah.
Like George Kittle did it because he's insane, and the San Francisco offense seems to get him down the field a bajillion times. But tight ends, for the most part, you're averaging, high 9s to mid 10s as far as yards per catch. I mean, Travis Kelce, 10.6, TJ Hawkinson, 10.1, Sam Laporta, 10.3, David Njoku, 10.9, Trey McBride, 10.2, Jake Ferguson, 10.7. I mean, over and over and over again. And that's the reason why meaningful production in catches doesn't necessarily lead to 1,300 yards receiver. That's not how it works. And I don't see that changing. Like, I don't think you're all of a sudden going to turn Dalton Kincaid into a 17-yard a catch player. I just don't think that's it. But I do think, as you saw at the end of last year, all of a sudden the average depth of target started to kind of creep up a little bit for Dalton Kincaid, and the average yards per catch started catching up. At the very beginning of the year, we were pulling our hair out going, you're just leaking him out into the flat. Like that's what you're doing with Dalton Kincaid. It makes me sad in my face. And I don't want to be sad in the face anymore. And then at the end of the year, he's looking better. So if I took what I would consider to be an uptick in volume and then a slight uptick to what I would consider to be good in yards per reception, you're probably looking, Dalton Kincaid had 73 catches on 90 targets before. I don't think that reception percentage is insane. I don't think being in the 80s or high 70s for that is insane at all. So if we kept it in the general neighborhood and you say, okay, he's get 110 or 120 targets and he catches 75% of them, right? So he has 120, he catches 75% of them. That's 90 catches, right? 90 catches. And then all of a sudden you're in a little bit of a better space. Instead of 9.2, it's like 10.5. That's 945 yards. That's 90 catches for 945 yards. And that's really, really good. That would have been the 5th best tight end in yardage, and it would have been top 3, 4 in catches last year. And those people have, more established competition at wide receiver than Dalton Kincaid does. So if you're looking at 130 targets, all of a sudden you're looking at a 1,000-yard receiver. But because they're so rare, I don't want to project that. But for me, I have pretty high. Those are pretty high expectations for Dalton Kincaid. But if you told me 90 catches for 945 yards and 6 touchdowns, I'd be like, yeah, okay, I'm good with that.
Yeah, and you should be. I mean, we just went through it. I mean, that would be an excellent season, especially for a second-year player. I think where you find a lot of intrigue in this overall conversation is the vacated targets that exist for the Buffalo Bills, right? There's a lot of them, over 230 targets from Diggs and Gabe Davis combined from last year. And you're like, who's going to eat those up? And you think, oh, Dalton Kincaid. But he also had 90 last year. That's a healthy amount of targets, especially for a rookie tight end. And, I find myself all the time on this podcast saying, I think Dalton Kincaid's going to get like 120 targets. Well, that's only happened 7 times over the last 3 years for all the tight ends in the NFL, right? So I'm trying to allow myself to get excited and wander my mind a little bit, but also I want to be grounded in terms of what reality is. But I think that you outlined it pretty well in terms of, all right, I think this is the range of outcomes that makes the most sense. I think that he can be a 120 target guy. And if so, I think he'll, like you said, around 90 catches, 900-ish yards. And, if there's a little bit more on the higher side of this, he's a 1,000-yard player. But I think if you're expecting a 1,300-yard tight end, I mean, that's super rare stuff. And I'm not saying it's outside of the realm of possibilities for Dalton Kincaid, but I want to be realistic about our expectations for him. Bruce, one of the things that you wanted to bring to this conversation was kind of comparing him to other top tight ends. And I'm very curious to kind of hear what you had to say about that.
We compare people to Hall of Famers a little bit too quickly.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about Dalton Kincaid. Clearly, I mean, I've used the word absurd. It's become kind of part of the embedded Bruce brand. Like, goodness gracious, if Dalton Kincaid doesn't end up being great, I'm gonna lose a piece of my identity at that point. But I mentioned it earlier during the conversation about economics, and I just mentioned it again in terms of statistics, and that is they don't make a lot of those players. Like, they don't make a lot of them. The reason why the tight end market isn't accelerating is because they don't make a lot of players who are resetting it. And so if you think Dalton Kincaid is like the guy, like he's that dude, then that's cool. But you just need to know that there aren't that many that dudes. And so one of the players that's currently at the top of the list is in the discussions constantly for the greatest tight end of all time. Now, I know that you're not necessarily, if you're listening to this, you're a Bills fan, you're not necessarily tapped into that, but the Gronk versus Kelsey thing has been going on with Chiefs and Patriots fans for a long time. Like, it's all, every single offseason, every single time Kelsey goes off during the regular season, it's Kelsey or Gronk, Kelsey or Gronk, Kelsey or Gronk as the great. And there's always that one guy who goes, Antonio Gates, like in the back. Right? There's always that one guy.
Yeah.
You know, there's a Falcons fan who wants to be included because the Chiefs get two of the best tight ends of all time. There's a Falcons fan who wants to come in on behalf of Tony Gonzalez, right? Just because he wants to, be part of the conversation. So that's the rarefied air we're talking about. So I want to be excited about Dalton Kincaid, which we should be. But I also want to be a little bit hesitant to compare people to like some of the greatest players at the position of all time. And expectations minus reality equals disappointment. And so expecting a good season, which is what I expect barring health, and then expecting him to, hold up to one of the greatest players in NFL history at his position is tough. And it's hard sometimes because a lot of variance with tight ends comes via touchdowns. And so what we have is you have a lot of people who this is where the fantasy community gets kind of injected into the conversation. And there's a lot of variance with touchdowns. There are people right now who are worried about Sam Laporta going into year 2 because he had 10 touchdowns. And all of a sudden, if he has a league average like 5 or 6, he's not the number one tight end anymore. Like that changes a lot of things. And so we inject ourselves into the conversation as like fantasy players, and then we extrapolate that out and then hold Dalton Kincaid to those expectations. And that's dangerous. And so I want to be fair to the player. I want to be excited to the player, but I want to be fair. And I don't think it's necessarily fair to hold him to that because that's insane. Like you're comparing somebody to, they just don't make them like that. There are already so few tight ends in the league that are worthy of being, speaking about like a top tier elite tight end, right? There's like 4 of them, 5 of them, maybe. Like we don't have like top 10 tight end conversations. You know why? Because nobody cares after 5.
Right.
That's the reason why. We have top 10 wide receiver and top 10 quarterback conversations all the time. Nobody has top 10 tight end conversations because nobody cares after 5. And so that's the danger of immediately slotting him into a tier when it's a rarefied air.
One of the really unique things about Travis Kelce, and I want to bring him up because I feel like that's the name I see for a lot of people, that this is the Bills' Travis Kelce. What's so unique about Travis Kelce, and I think more and more people are coming onto this, Travis Kelce doesn't run routes, right? Like sometimes, but for the most part, it's just find a little space, sit down. Pat Mahomes can manipulate and move around, and whether that's move coverage with his eyes or move within the pocket and then just throw it to him and he turns and runs. Like that's a really unique circumstance in the history of the NFL. And there's a lot of production that comes via that. And obviously Josh Allen's going to play off script a good amount, and he's going to find Dalton Kincaid a good amount, but like that piece of the pie, I don't know that you're ever going to see that type of quarterback tight end duo and how they function and how successful it's been. So there,
I think about the amount of zone coverage that the Buffalo Bills have faced relative to man. The Bills faced more man coverage than any team in the league last year. And you think to yourself, that's the reason why Dalton Kincaid can't beat Travis Kelce. That's the reason why. Is because he's not going to see that same level of zone coverage. And so everybody runs more zone than man. Okay. So when you say, this is important, when I say a lot, quote unquote, of man coverage, that's like 38 to 42% is quote unquote a lot of man coverage, because everybody is a zone. We do this a lot when we criticize Sean McDermott. We're like, oh, he runs his zone defense. Everybody runs his zone defense. Like everybody, like it's 60 plus for zone for all the teams. Like that's just the way it works. And so when you see a lot of zone coverage that the Chiefs do because they're worried about Patrick Mahomes and they're worried about things like that, they go, well, we're just going to play ourselves into Travis Kelce. It just works. It's the perfect storm for Travis Kelce, right? Hall of Fame coach, Hall of Fame quarterback, tons of zone coverage. Like it's the perfect storm. I'm not taking anything away from Travis Kelce. He's awesome, right? And the fact that the run after catch stuff has still managed to hang around in his mid-30s is just awesome, right? Every year you see some sort of highlight from Travis Kelce and go, well, I thought the wheels were falling off, and there we go. He's just doing that thing that he does again. But this is the reason why we got so excited in the first segment when we were talking about Dalton Kincaid against man coverage is because you're going to see a lot of it. And you might see more of it this year, absent Stephon Diggs. It's not the same situation, but Kincaid is a smooth route runner. If he can get off press, if he can get stronger, I think he can win against man.
Well, Bruce, this conversation was outstanding. I knew you were the guy to call when I considered having a Dalton Kincaid conversation. And so hopefully this was a useful conversation for Bills Mafia to listen to further their understanding about who Kincaid is and why he's valuable and what we can expect from the future. Really appreciate you giving me some of your time, Bruce.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.